The final chapter on JFK, Chapter 11, Segment 6, The Autopsy.
A series of deliberate choices were made by Lyndon Johnson following Kennedy's death on the evidence in this case. Everything in Kennedy's final autopsy was wrong, was covered up, has left questions for Americans ever since. And that wasn't your fault, my fault, or anyone else's, except for Lyndon Baines Johnson. President Kennedy's autopsy was an absolute mess. Of course, it didn't have to be, nor should it have ever been a mess, but that's what happened. And it happened for several reasons. One, the selection of the hospital. The hospital that was selected was Bethesda Naval Hospital. This was not a hospital where medical students were taught, but rather a hospital that taught technicians, not doctors. The hospital itself had never specialized in gunshot victims or their wounds. In fact, for almost all of the hospital's autopsies, it involved merely people dying of natural causes. Not only was the hospital wrong, but the selection of the doctors was also wrong. 3 doctors were involved in the autopsy. 2 from Bethesda, and 1 came over from Walter Reed. The 2 from Bethesda were Dr. Boswell and Dr. Humes. The doctor who was called in from Walter Reed was a doctor by the name of Pierre Finch. Both Humes and Boswell were paper pushers. In fact, one of the doctors had not done an autopsy since he was in medical school. And for Dr. Pierre Finch, the supposed forensic pathologist, his skill and training was not performing forensic pathological investigations, but rather administrative. He reviewed the autopsy reports that were conducted by the physicians actually performing the work. Yet, these 3 doctors were chosen to do the most important autopsy in 100 years. Up on the green screen is the autopsy manual that was in effect at the time of Kennedy's death. Noted in the manual are definitions of 2 different types of autopsies: a standard military autopsy, and the other is a medical legal autopsy. The order for Kennedy's autopsy was a standard military autopsy, which is merely determining the cause of death. With those problems, and perhaps because of those problems, mountains of additional evidence and information has come forward over the years. There have been claims that his head wounds were surgically covered up and altered. There are claims that dozens of autopsy photographs are missing and others are faked. There are claims that Kennedy's brain was switched out. There is even an interesting claim that a man by the name of William Pitzer, who was a Navy medical audiovisual chief and who may have taken film and slides of the autopsy, died under very strange circumstances, supposedly a suicide. There are even statements made by the photo lab operators who said that they were required to secretly develop different photographs than what appear in the National Archives. Whether these claims are true or not, these matters can still be disputed. So what we have to do is we actually have to look at the absolute undisputed facts that exist in this case and see what we can pull out. First, Dr. Thornton Boswell was the first person to be contacted about performing the autopsy on President Kennedy. Boswell stated that the Navy Department had gotten a communique from Dallas. Boswell later stated that he recalled getting the phone call at around 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. This is significant that although there was fighting on the plane for 2 hours as to where Kennedy was going to have his autopsy done, we now know that within minutes or perhaps even before Air Force One took off at 2:47 p.m. Central Standard Time, the acting director of the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, located at Walter Reed, already was ordering and saying that it was going to occur at Bethesda. When Boswell received the call, the first thing he said to the acting director was, "This is ridiculous to do the post-op here." He said that it should be done at Walter Reed. Under oath testimony from Dr. Thornton Boswell states the following: Jim understood that we were to do a limited autopsy to find, I think the initial thing they told us, we were to find the bullets, that they had captured the assailant, and that's all they needed. Who had the power to make an order like that to anyone in the military? Perhaps it was the commander-in-chief. With this undisputed evidence, things get even better. Their job was to find the bullets because the culprit had been caught. That's Lee Harvey Oswald. This was a murder. And with the suspect being caught, doesn't end the case at all. You still have to investigate the body to prove the suspect committed the murder. The bullets, the angles, the trajectories, none of that was done. You wouldn't stop an autopsy, and you wouldn't stop looking and investigating the body when you have a crime, unless the suspect who had been caught was dead. What can be learned from the undisputed testimony of these doctors along with documentation? One, the doctor who was involved and who prepared the autopsy report destroyed the first draft. He burned it. Number two, all of the doctors and all of the staff who were present were ordered to remain silent and to not talk about the autopsy at all. Number three, we also know the doctors in their report stated specifically that the Surgeon General of the Navy advised Dr. Humes that the purpose of the autopsy was to determine the nature of the president's injuries and the cause of his death. Gunshot wound to the head. Additionally, although there have been disputes about the bullet wound to Kennedy's head and the size of it, and supposedly President Kennedy's brain, when it was weighed several days later, weighed 1,500 grams, or about the average weight of an adult male's brain before they suffered any type of gunshot wound to the head. With that said, when Dr. Thornton Boswell was discussing taking Kennedy out of the casket and unwrapping him, question: when the body was first unwrapped, particularly the head, was the brain still present in the cranium? Answer: most of it. Question: when you say most of it, approximately how much of it was there? Answer: well, probably half of one hemisphere was absent. And that is Dr. Boswell's testimony under oath. Added to that, the x-rays showed dozens of metal particles still within the brain. A Milky Wave, they called it. A full metal jacket bullet, the type that supposedly was shot by Lee Harvey Oswald, would not leave small metal particles in the brain, such as the type depicted on the x-rays. And when we're talking brains, the brain of John F. Kennedy is missing. And with that brain missing, it cannot be shown unequivocally that these people are telling the truth. Most importantly, where did the evidence go? According to the doctors, the bone fragments went with all the rest of the material down to the White House. Secret Service agent Roy Kellerman, in his report, states that prior to our departure from the Naval Hospital, I received all the film, x-rays that were used during this autopsy, and upon arrival at the White House, I turned them over to Special Agent in Charge, Boak. The only person that Secret Service agent Boak would have delivered that material to, that evidence to, was none other than the new President of the United States, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who had gotten all the original evidence from Dallas, Texas, either up in his plane or in subsequent trips by the FBI. When Lyndon Johnson died, There was an autopsy conducted on him that revealed that instead of having one major heart attack that everyone knew about in 1955, he had actually had 5 major heart attacks. Now, when Johnson died, he wasn't murdered. He wasn't part of a crime scene. His body shouldn't have been autopsied to such an extent, but we learned quite a bit about him. Unfortunately, the prior president, who was murdered, we didn't find much out about him at all, except for his brain is missing. We'll learn about that later in another segment. See you soon.